Welcome inside the fish tank, everybody. My name is Andrew Sparator. Today I'm joined by my co-host Nick Vasella. It is currently December 31st, New Year's Eve, and in terms of NFL, it is Week 17 we are heading into. So, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good as always, and this show is going to be dedicated to reflecting on this past 2020 fantasy season. We have several awards ranging from fantasy MVP to bust of the year to sleeper and all that sort of stuff. So we'll discuss that. I don't know. It feels good to just reflect on the year, and then next week we will have a great show, highly anticipated show coming up where we will discuss our way too early 2021 rankings. But as for this show, go ahead.
That is going to be a very exciting episode. But as for this episode, you mentioned it. We're getting into our 2020 Fantasy Football Awards. Obviously, I am dressed nicely for the occasion. Nick, not so much. But speaking of reflecting on this past season, today on the show, we are going to be joined by the winner of both our home redraft league and our startup dynasty league. It is TJ Rogers joining the show. Here he is. Welcome in, TJ Rogers. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me, guys.
Absolutely. First of all, let me just ask you, how did it feel to win both leagues, be the genius of both leagues, and be the mastermind, and just be the best this year and take home well over, $800?
Well, it was expected. Going into the season, I expected to win. This was, I won the first year of high school. It was only fitting to end high school with a win, like a little sandwich.
Me and Nick, the ingredients on the sandwich?
Yes, you're the insides and I'm the bread.
Yeah, it must be nice to be on a show now where you got, your biggest supporter, me. I was the only guy really that was in there out of our league that really wanted you to win. And because, I really appreciate fantasy greatness, whereas, everybody else, they like to be jealous and envious of, and they want to cut you down, but not here. On the fish tank, you are more than welcome.
Thank you, Fish. I appreciate all your support all season, and I hope you win it next year.
Thank you for that. That means a lot coming from you. All right.
Any last words before we get into the awards?
By me?
Anyone.
The only thing I want to say is that I think that me winning this season, both leagues, shows that anything is possible, right? If you just, MLK once said, I have a dream, all right? And my dream this season was to win both leagues, and it happened. So put your heart to it. Anything can happen.
Words of wisdom from TJ Rogers, the winner of both leagues. All right. And we should just get right into it. And we are going to start off with our first award, which is the Fantasy MVP. Sparator, why don't you give us your Fantasy MVP of the year and why?
I would love to go first. And, when I was thinking about this, it was really this guy, and I didn't really think there was any other possible person that could receive this award. So without further ado, my fantasy MVP goes out to Travis Kelce, the tight end, the Kansas City Chiefs. Travis Kelce, who is currently second in the league in receiving yards, fifth in touchdowns, and fourth in receptions, mind you, at the tight end position. So at a position that was so scarce this year, he's giving you top-end wide receiver numbers. So let's just break it down for a second. He did break the all-time tight end receiving yard record with his game this past week. But as in fantasy terms, he is clearly the undisputed tight end one in fantasy, especially with George Kittle's injury. So the tight end two behind him was Darren Waller. And he outscored Darren Waller by a grand total of 77 fantasy points this year. Now, all right, that's fine. That's okay. Now, the difference between him and the tight end three was 146 fantasy points. And the tight end three was Robert Tonyan. And, like I said, this is a scarce position. And you're able to get wide receiver top end wide receiver numbers out of him. It's basically like it's starting an extra player in your tight end spot, because you get what every other tight end is producing in addition to like 15 extra points. So it's literally like having an extra flex spot. He has at least double the amount of points as the tight end 7 and beyond. So that's half of the tight ends that are started in a 12-team league. He has more than double of their total fantasy points on the season. He is 12th in total fantasy points from every position: quarterback, wide receiver, and running back. And he's 5th among those non-quarterbacks. So, I mean, I just didn't really see this as a close contest. I mean, Travis Kelce, if you had him on your team, it's pretty hard to lose unless the rest of your team absolutely sucks. He's just phenomenal to have on your team.
Absolutely. I've got a little bit of an issue with you, Sperator. So why don't we just pass it off to TJ Rogers, who had, obviously, he had Travis Kelce on his team, which helped him to the championship. So, TJ, if you have any words on Travis Kelce, give them, and then follow up with your fantasy MVP.
Well, actually, my fantasy MVP is Travis Kelce. I had that too, because if you look at his last 11 games, the guy's put up 21.5 9 times. I mean, you can't make this stuff up at tight end. When Robert Tonyan, like Andrew said, who scored, I think he has 10 touchdowns on the year, 150 points less, and he's put up 10 touchdowns. I mean, this guy, without Travis Kelce, I don't know if I win the championship, but I knew that with Travis Kelce, I could rely on at least 20 points per week. So that was very nice when I was playing people like Austin Hooper as my opponent. And I think this year really shows that how important the tight end position is, because next year we're projecting, three tight ends in the top 20 picks. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen this before. We've seen like one, and Kittle maybe last year. So yeah, Kelce definitely changed the position this year, and I'm super happy that I had him.
Yeah, Kelsey's definitely a round 1 pick, I think, next year, and then Kittle and Waller will definitely follow in round 2, I think. But we'll get into that on our upcoming episodes. But make that to you that I got a little bit of an issue with. I don't really, disagree that Travis Kelce's a fantasy MVP, but actually, no, just an issue with Sperator. But for Sperator to say it's just no contest whatsoever, to me, that's a little bit uneducated, because my fantasy MVP is Alvin Kamara. And I just, it's pretty, self-explanatory, really. I mean, he's been the best player all year in fantasy. He had the most points out of anybody. And I've seen this. There's a bunch of stats that Alvin Kamara was on more championship teams than any other player, around 23% of championship teams on every site. He's the RB1. He averaged 25.19 points, PPR points per game. And for those teams, obviously, that had Kamara, he basically won him a championship with 6 touchdowns in Week 16. So Alvin Kamara this year, I mean, he was the best player overall. I mean, that seems to me like it would be the easy and default choice for fantasy MVP.
Now I perfectly see where you're coming from here, but the difference between a guy like Alvin Kamara and a guy like Travis Kelce is that there is no one close to Travis Kelce at his respective position. At running back, you have guys like Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry and even James Robinson, who put up very similar numbers to him. And then you look at a guy like Travis Kelce, who I gave you the numbers. No one's even close to what he put up this season.
Yeah, but the stat I just couldn't get away from on this was he was on more championship teams than any other player. So I just think that he was the MVP for the fantasy community out there. More people that won this year had Kamara than any other player. All right. So that brings us now to our bust of the year, which is quite contrary to MVP. Mr. TJ Rogers, give us your bust of the year.
So I think that this is actually a pretty obvious pick. And I wonder if Sperator has the same pick, because my LVP of the year is Michael Thomas. This guy is an absolute clown, all right? You were drafting him above Devontae Adams, which turned out to be a terrible pick. But this guy did not even play this season when you had such high hopes. And then when he was about to come back, he punches a teammate in the face. So not only is he out because of injury, but he's out because of personal reasons. So you can't even play him. You're mad at him. You trade him away. He probably has that one good game against the Falcons when you don't have him on your team, and then he's out for the season. So you go from someone who he broke the season record for receptions last year. Am I correct?
Yes.
To probably the biggest bust in the next year in probably the last 10 seasons in fantasy history.
Yeah, you were spot on. He is actually my fantasy bust of the year. Now, I know exactly what you guys are thinking out there. He was injured the whole year. There's no way you can call him a bust. You can't predict injury. But here's the difference between this guy and a guy like Christian McCaffrey. The difference is that Michael Thomas, he played in some games. And when he played, he hurt your lineup. When he was playing, he was the wide receiver 39 in PPR points per game. So you're putting him in your lineup with confidence that he's going to be a wide receiver 1. But no, he actually hurt your team. Now you go to a guy like Christian McCaffrey. He only played 3 games, but when he played, he was a rock star. He put up like 30 points in every single week he played. So you knew that if Christian McCaffrey was in, you were going to get that star week, and if he was out, that's fine. He's on your IR. But with Michael Thomas, you had to play him because it's Michael Thomas, but he really burned you, and I'm sure he lost many people their weeks in fantasy this year because of his horrible performance. I mean, he hasn't scored a touchdown all year. That's just absurd. And like you said, he broke the single season reception record last year. Now let me read you his stats from last year compared to this year. 12 targets a game last year, 9 receptions and 108 yards. Now this year, 8 targets, 6 receptions per game, and 63 yards per game. So obviously there's a drastic difference there. And like you said, you drafted him over superstars like Devontae Adams, who's been absolutely insane. He's definitely a fantasy MVP in that consideration. And you drafted him over some of the top running backs because you had to use a first-round pick to get this guy because of what he did last year. So I think this is another clear bust candidate despite the injury.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you guys are coming from because, I mean, he not a touchdown all year. You said it is just absurd. He really only had, two good games when he had 9 receptions for 104 yards and then 9 for 105. Only 2 weeks, actually, both coming against the Atlanta Falcons. So he couldn't do anything else. He couldn't do anything against anybody else. But I just think it's a little, everyone interprets this award kind of differently. Like, obviously you guys didn't really, you knew that he was injured and you still chose him to be the LVP anyway. I don't typically like to go with that. I like to, because, there are a bunch of guys that get hurt every year. A lot of people could be the bust of the year, when you factor in injuries, but I typically like to choose somebody that's that's just really played the majority of the way and it's just been god awful. And for me, when I look at the bust of the year, I kind of narrowed it down between 2 guys, and I ultimately ended up picking one guy because he's been terrible. I had it between Ezekiel Elliott and Kenyon Drake. And my bust of the year is Kenyon Drake. And I think everyone out there who's into fantasy knows that Kenyon Drake, there was a lot of hype with him coming into the year. He had that, pretty, I guess it was short to, a solid sample size with the Cardinals in 2019. And he was nothing but spectacular. He had 1 game with 4 touchdowns, and the following week in championship week, he followed it up with, I think it was 180 plus scrimmage yards and a couple of touchdowns in Seattle. So, I mean, there were big expectations coming into this year with this guy. And he was drafted around the round 2 turn. And he's just been flat out awful. He is at the RB 14 in PPR scoring, but he is the running back 24 on a points per game basis. And those points per game are 13.15. So definitely not numbers you would be expecting from a guy that you drafted in the first late first to early second rounds. And this stat is just mind-boggling. He's only had 2 games this year over 16 PPR fantasy points. I mean, he just hasn't caught passes all year. We didn't really expect, Chase Edmonds to play as big of a role as he has. I mean, Kenyon Drake is not in the ball game on third downs or even second and long. That's all Chase Edmonds. So Kenyon Drake is he's really been disappointing, and it's really hard for him to get at past the 18 touch mark in a game. He's had work stolen from him all year long from Kyler Murray around the goal line too, and just rushing in general. And Drake hasn't really even been productive when he's gotten the carries. He's right around that, like 3.5 to 4 yards per carry. But that's all right, if you're getting like 20 plus carries a game. But Drake isn't. He's really in that like 14 carry range, and it's been tough. He's been scoring recently, but all year in the beginning part, it's been tough for him to score. So this is just not what you want, and it hasn't been what you expected from Kenyon Drake, which is why he's my bust of the year.
You are absolutely right. I don't have the numbers on me, but I guarantee you he has more finishes outside the top 30 than inside the top 10. I can guarantee you that.
Absolutely.
For a guy you're drafting in the first round, I mean, it's really not good.
All right, let's move on to our next award, which is Old Reliable. So this award is pretty much dedicated to the guy that's been the most consistent, and he's been there week in and week out for your fantasy team. You've had no worries plugging him in to your squad every week to try to get a win. Old Reliable, who is it for you, Andrew Sarator?
Yeah, my Old Reliable. I feel like I keep saying this, but another clear-cut one. It's Stephon Diggs, wide receiver of the Buffalo Bills. I mean, when you think of consistent, this is the first guy that comes to my mind. He's had 0 weeks under 10 PPR fantasy points. He's currently the wide receiver 3 on the season in total points. And wide receivers, in my opinion, are the most inconsistent position. I mean, 1 week you get a 30-point game, next week you get two for 24 and 4 points. But Diggs has never had that game this season. He's had 1 week where he's had under 6 catches, and that came in week 3 against the LA Rams and Jalen Ramsey, who have shut literally every wide receiver that has come there down. And on the contrary, 7 weeks over 20 fantasy points, and out of those 7 weeks, 5 of them have been over 25. 7 weeks of over 100 receiving yards. So, I mean, you're getting that safe floor. And obviously last game he had that monster 3 or 4, was it 4 touchdowns? Three
against
game.
New England.
Yeah, that won many people championships. And he's just, I mean, I would love to have this guy on my team next year, because I know he's not going to be drafted in the first round just because he's not one of the big names like Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams, but he certainly should be. So, yeah, Stephon Diggs, Old Reliable.
No argument from me at all. I mean, Diggs is, you said it, he's been the definition of consistent this year. I mean, every single week except for, maybe like 1 or 2 where he's been in the low, the low teens in PPR points. He's been there, putting up solid numbers for your squad. TJ, who is your Old Reliable this year?
I'm finally going to have one different than Spiritor. My Old Reliable this year was Devontae Adams. And I don't think there's many people that I go against in fantasy lineups and I say, oh my gosh, he has Devontae Adams. I am scared. Because this guy, with the amount of targets that he's getting from Aaron Rodgers, with no real wide receiver 2 in Green Bay, he's getting at least 10 to 12 targets per game. It doesn't matter what matchup he has. I mean, he's playing the Bears this week. He's still the number 1 ranked receiver by every single ESPN analyst, and he could easily put up 30 points in a game. I mean, would we just see him put up against? Let me see how much did he just put up against Tennessee?
He put up 43
against Tennessee. Won a lot of people championships like Diggs, and he's just like Stephon Diggs. I can't blame Spiritor for that answer, but I'd go with Devontae Adams just because I think he has a little more upside than Diggs, and I could say, all right, if I need 35 points, I can put in Adams. I still have a great shot.
Yep, I am going to be similar to TJ. I chose Devontae Adams for this too. I mean, oh my God, this is These are world-class numbers from Adams. He's the wide receiver 1 on the year, having missed 2.5 games. He left in week 2 with a hamstring injury and then missed the following 2 with that hamstring. Get it? He's averaged 26.29 PPR, fantasy points per game. And 6 of those games, he has at least 30 PPR points. I mean, Davante Adams is the definition of guaranteed production. And count it, he's got 5 games with over 10 receptions. He's got 7 games with over 100 yards receiving. And he's got 5. He's got only 3 games all year, and that's including the game he left with the injury. 3 games all year with no touchdowns. So I mean, these are just absurd. And in multiple of those games, he's got 2 and 3 receiving touchdowns. These are just incredible numbers. I mean, forget Davante Adams' floor. I mean, his floor is definitely high, but I mean, Davante Adams is guaranteed at like 20 fantasy points at least every single game. And this is a guy that is, how was Davante Adams not, drafted where Michael Thomas was next year when we look back on it? I mean, Aaron Rodgers is, he's always going to rely on that one receiver, and the Green Bay had nobody else. And Adams with his talent, it just should have been, we should have known better. I mean, he went in the second round in our league, but I mean, Davante Adams should have been a top, 5 pick this year, with this production. And I think he definitely will warrant that pick coming up this year. So Davante Adams is my old reliable.
Yeah, I had it between Diggs and Adams now. I know this might be a dumb reason, but the only reason why I didn't pick Adams was because he missed the 2 games that you spoke of, and he left early in one. But other than that, he's been money.
All right, moving on to our next award, Best Waiver Pickup of the Year. And in my opinion, there's really only one correct answer for this, and I think we're all going to have the same guy. But Andrew Sperator, give us your best waiver pickup of the year.
James Robinson. Plain and simple, James Robinson. I mean, James Robinson, a waiver pickup, mind you. A guy you picked up on the waivers. Now, some guys you have to use some capital for. You have to use your free agent budget to acquire him. But no, James Robinson, you acquired him for literally nothing. You just hit claim, and he was on your team. And this guy is the running back 4 this year, despite missing last week. I mean, is there really anything else that has to be said about James Robinson for best waiver pickup?
Nope. I mean, TJ, I assume you had James Robinson.
I did have James Robinson. I just want to put out 2 people out there who I didn't think you guys would mention. Myles Gaskin. He also was a very nice pickup this year when he played. And I don't really know if some people drafted him, but Justin Jefferson, if he was on waivers, I mean, that's just an obvious, amazing waiver wire pickup because he's the wide receiver 8. I know he was a top 5 wide receiver going into last week. He's just been a beast.
Yeah, and let me take everyone back for a little bit, back to when James Robinson really got picked up. It was before the season. And you picked up James Robinson as basically a flyer after drafts once we got the news that Leonard Fournette he was traded, and then Raquel Armstead, he got COVID, and he hasn't played all year. But that's when we picked up James Robinson. We picked him up along with Chris Thompson.
Chris Thompson.
And you know what I remember that really pisses me off? I remember that I was the first person that got news, with our Fakakta cockamamie waiver system that we got going on here, where it's waiver claims, and instead of fab, which is it's ridiculous to say the least. But I was the first person to get this news. I was on my phone at the time the news broke. I got the alert. I went straight to the fantasy app, and I saw that Chris Thompson was there. And then in the depth chart, it was Devine Ozigbo next. I didn't even give a thought to James Robinson, who is the undrafted free agent rookie. I picked up Thompson because I figured, the connection with him and Gruden going back to Washington, and I figured he might be, a great Nyheim Hines or James White in this offense that's going to be trailing all year long. But no, it's James Robinson who's the star, and James Robinson is the third down back and catching passes in this offense too. He's absolutely amazing. Sperator said RB4 on the year, averaged 17.8 PPR points per game. Like Diggs, he's been super consistent all year. His lowest scoring game this year was 10 points, and he had that in week 1. And this is league winning. This was a league winning pickup, and it happened before the year even started with James Robinson. As you said, he went from basically, nothing to top 4 running back production.
I just want to say just one thing. I mean, if you watch this guy on Red Zone, he usually has a play every single week. He is just so fun to watch. I mean, he could truck someone. He could hurdle over somebody. I've seen him juke people on his shoes. I mean, he is like a combination of Derrick Henry, but also Christian McCaffrey. Put them together. Obviously not as talented, but just so fun to watch for such a terrible team in the Jaguars.
Absolutely. Probably the best rookie running back, and he was undrafted, and he went to one of the worst teams in the NFL, too.
Yeah, I remember like week 1, he got literally 100% of the Jacksonville Jaguar carries. And like you said, that was his worst week with 10 points. I remember the question we were all asking was, how good can the number 1 running back on the Jacksonville Jaguars really be? I mean, it's the Jaguars. And he proved us all wrong. And don't worry, Fish, you weren't the only one that went to pick up Chris Thompson over him. I'm pretty sure everyone and their mom did the same thing. So,
yep. James Robinson, the best waiver pickup of the year, clear winner of that award. And now we move over to the playoff winner. Sperator, give us your playoff winner.
All right, my playoff winner is David Montgomery, the running back of the Chicago Bears, who I gave a lot of hate this year in the first half when he was averaging like 2 yards a carry, and he was just brutal to watch. But over the last 4 weeks, weeks 12 to 16, he's the running back 1. And over that same span, he is averaging over 25 fantasy points per game. He has 7 total touchdowns. He's getting 138 yards a game, and he has just been phenomenal. And the first before his bye week and before the concussion that he had where he missed a game, he was all right for fantasy. He was a floor option. He wasn't going to give you like 20 points. He was going to get you in that 12 to 16 point range every week. And you knew that because of the volume he gets. But now he's getting the volume and he's also getting the touchdowns. And that was the real question that we had with David Montgomery in the first half of the year. He wasn't getting many touchdowns. And now when he's getting the touchdowns, he's proved he can be a viable fantasy option. And to fit the title of playoff winner, he is most certainly, if you made it to the playoffs with him, he has most certainly helped you along the way with his 25 points a game.
TJ, who was your playoff winner?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, David Montgomery was mine. He helped me win the championship, and I got him for Damian Harris. So that was an awesome trade. Thank you, Mr. Mame in our league. And I've never seen a player just explode like this, like out of nowhere. I mean, you go from someone who's averaging like 11 points a game, okay, to all of a sudden he's the RB1. I mean, just an absolute great pickup for anyone who bought low on him. And I don't know, what did you say?
So Miles Sanders, but go ahead.
Right, Miles Sanders, that bum. Yeah. So I'm just so happy that I traded for him, and all fantasy owners who did, they definitely had a great shot at winning the championship.
Make it a clean sweep. I got David Montgomery, too, as the playoff winner. Playoff performances, I'll go week by week. He had in week 13, 25.3, then 27.1, 24.5, 29.2, and then in week 16, 20.1. And these are just incredible stats for David Montgomery, who was scoring and he was rushing for well over 120 yards in these games too. And I just think that the Chicago Bear offense really figured something out. They figured that, this offense is going to thrive, based on a run game. Then they could play off it with the play action pass with Mitchell Trubisky, who, isn't that great of a pocket passer, in obvious passing downs. But, when they give the ball to Montgomery 25, plus times every game, he's been able to do something with it. I think the Bear offensive line has played better in the second half too. And Montgomery, he's going to play, he's going to, be the passing downs back too. So, I mean, just incredible efficiency from Montgomery. And I guess it's just, he's I'm speechless on because Montgomery went from like 2 yards a carry. He like have 14 carries for 30 yards,
Yeah, he sucked.
and now going to and I think against the Vikings, what did he have like 25 carries for like 100 and 60 yards or something.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the O line just played better, and Montgomery, I guess he just pounded the rock. I guess. I mean, should be interesting to see where David Montgomery goes next year in drafts. How many people are going to buy that he can sustain this this late season production, or how many people think that he goes back to old form, or will we see a combination of both? So it'll be interesting to see where he goes.
Yes. Now I'm gonna hit the brakes. I'm gonna slam on the gas pedal, the brakes right now for the David Montgomery hype train. Now, David Montgomery, obviously, because of this finish, he's gonna severely move up draft boards. He probably before this he was gonna be like a 5th round pick. Now I think he's gonna be a 2nd round pick at worst. Now, here's where I am very, very cautious. So let me read you the worst run teams from 32 to 27. The worst run defenses are Houston, Detroit, Las Vegas, Jacksonville, Green Bay, and Minnesota. Now let me tell you the teams he's played over this span. Houston, Detroit, Jacksonville, Green Bay, and Minnesota. Now, I know the opponents aren't everything, but this is definitely eye-opening that he's played literally 5 of the worst 6 run defenses in the entire league. And there's obviously a lot of people are just looking straight at his production, but I am looking at the teams he's played, and he's not going to be able to play bottom 5 run defenses every week next year. So I am not aboard the David Montgomery hype train. And obviously I mentioned Miles Sanders before. He was very similar to this last year, and we saw what happened. He kind of did not live up to the hype that was built in the offseason. But go ahead, TJ.
Just to add on to that, Tariq Cohen was out for the entire year with a torn ACL.
That is also another good point.
So, yeah, that'll be the 3rd down back next year. So, Montgomery, I think I'd be okay with him for like my RB2, but definitely not as my RB1 next year.
All right, moving ahead to our most developed award, and this is a very interesting. This is the one I kind of struggled with the most. I mean, there are so many different directions you could go in with the most developed award. How about TJ? Give us your most developed player this year.
So my most developed player this year was Jonathan Taylor, because at the beginning of the year we saw Marlon Mack go down. And so everyone was like, oh, Jonathan Taylor, he's going to be superstar running back. And we saw that for like a game. And then all of a sudden his workload got less and less. And we had that Thursday night game against the Titans when Nyheim Hines went off. And we said, oh, no, Jonathan Taylor's done. Nyheim Hines is the one. And suddenly, recently, let me just check what his game log is, because I think he has been doing very well. His last few games are 22, 30, 19, and 19. So we're finally seeing a trend, which happens to a lot of rookie running backs, where they take a while to develop, and suddenly this guy is turning into a pretty good running back. And if you watch Colts games, you can tell that he's obviously the best player on offense for them. And it's exciting to see what he can do next season.
Yeah, I think this happened. This was a similar situation to David Montgomery. He was getting the volume. He was having decent production, but he had like no touchdowns for the first half of the year. I mean, he had 4 touchdowns from weeks 1 to 11. Then over the last 4 weeks, he's had 5 touchdowns. So obviously the touchdowns, play a big role in a player's ceiling. And I think since he's hitting these touchdowns, he's obviously become a more reliable and dependable fantasy option.
Yep, and we will also have more to come on Jonathan Taylor for sure when we discuss our way too early 2021 rankings. I definitely want to go in depth on Jonathan Taylor, and I definitely understand the most developed because, I mean, we all wrote him, for dead going back to the Tennessee game where, it was the Nyheim Hines coming out party. But I think what most people don't realize about the Colt offense is that Jonathan Taylor plays on more 3rd downs than you think. just watching the games, he's in there a lot. And I know he didn't have a reception last week against the Steelers, but he still managed 19 points, which is really, really good. And when you just watch this guy, he passes the eyeball test for sure. He's just a tank. I mean, he's a bulldozer the way he runs over defenders, and he's fast too. He's a powerhouse. I mean, I think he's a really solid running back, and it'll be interesting to see who the quarterback for Indianapolis is next year. Who will be taking snaps for them, and we know the Colts are always going to have a great offensive line. So Jonathan Taylor is definitely living up to his potential this year so far. All right, Andrew Sferatur, give us your most developed player of the year.
Right. My most developed player is a tight end. It is Logan Thomas of the Washington football team. Now, I know I gave a lot of hate to the tight end position earlier when I mentioned Travis Kelce, but Logan Thomas, since week 6, has been the tight end 3 in points per game and in total points, behind obviously the 2 stars, Travis Kelce and Darren Waller. He's averaged 17 points per game over the last 4 weeks, and since we're talking about most developed, the first 5 weeks are really irrelevant, where he was the tight end 27. Now he's a tight end 3. So I just think he fits this mold perfectly. I think at the beginning of the year he was getting the volume, but the volume from the Washington football team quarterbacks, aren't always the best. And at the end of the year, where we are right now, that volume has obviously picked up. He's improved as a player. Obviously, Logan Thomas, if you didn't know, was a quarterback in college, but now he's a tight end in the National Football League. And he's been one of those few tight ends that you could plug into your lineup every week and know that he's going to produce for you. So Logan Thomas is my most developed player.
Yep, definitely been, giving fantasy managers what he can and more at the tight end position this year. My most developed player, and I had to think about this for a while, but I settled on the rookie wide receiver Brandon Ayuk, who has really, really emerged as a solid option in the San Francisco passing game as of late and for the better part of the second half. And he's done it kind of quietly, too. Back in his first 5 games, and he's a rookie, he's still trying to figure things out. He averaged 10 PPR fantasy points per game. He was a bench player at best. Some people, cut him too. But his last 7 games, he has averaged 17.9, so almost 18 PPR points per game. And that is including last week when he only had 1 catch for 15 yards. So if you minus that game out, he's over 20 points per game. And as I said, he's quietly putting up, top 12 wide receiver numbers. He's right up there with the Adam Thielens of the world and, Allen Robinson's over the stretch, as a really nice option. And I think he's been a starter for you most of these weeks. He's had, just running down the game log, even back to week 7 in New England, which really started his breakout. 6 for 115, then 8 for 90 and 1, 7 for 75 and 1. 5 for 95 and 1, then 10 for 119, 9 for 73 and 1, and Brandon Ayuk he's been a tremendous player for the San Francisco 49ers, and he's done it with, pretty poor quarterback play. They've been switching, originally it was Garoppolo, then, they got Mullins in there, he got hurt, so now Beathard's in there, and Ayuk has pretty much, done it with all of them. So Brandon Ayuk, my most developed player this year.
Yeah, Ayuk has been one of the few bright spots coming out of the injury-plagued San Francisco team, and the injury bug caught up to him. He was out. He's out for the year now. I know it's week 17, but I can't. It's uncanny what has happened to the 49ers offense and defense. I mean, every single skill position player has gotten hurt this year, and it's just unbelievable.
Absolutely. All right, moving ahead to our most aged player award. And when I did this one, I mean, immediately, without even hesitation, there were 2 guys that popped into my mind, but I had to go with this one guy. But I'll let TJ, you give us your most aged player of the season.
So this one was pretty obvious to me, and it felt good because Thomas Walsh, the person who owned this person in our league, used to brag about him so much before the bye. But it's Todd Gurley. I mean, this guy has been terrible since the bye. Do you know how many points Todd Gurley has since his bye week in total?
50.
He has 24 points since his week 9 bye. That is unbelievably bad, and he was a top 5 running back in points before the bye. I don't know what happened to Todd Gurley, but ever since then he is unusable in fantasy. I was so happy because Thomas would always send me offers saying, "Oh, Todd Gurley's the top 5 back. You got to take him." No, he sucks. All right, you can't use Todd Gurley. All right, I will never draft him ever again after this year. He gets less carries than Ito Smith when it's Todd Gurley and Ito Smith is getting 80% of the carries. I mean, what is that? But yeah, I mean, that was pretty obvious. My other one was Russell Wilson. I don't know if you guys had him. He's kind of fallen off a cliff, but not as much as Todd Gurley.
Yeah, let me
Todd, wait a sec. Todd Gurley, he's so bad right now to the point where he has lost his starting running back job. He has lost his job in the NFL. He is now a backup and a complimentary change of pace to Ito Smith and Brian Hill. If that doesn't tell you, all you need to know about Todd Gurley, then I don't know what will, because he is so bad. This guy used to be only 2 years ago, he was a star of this league. He was lighting up every single football game and the number 1 fantasy player. What a fall from grace. One knee injury has turned into arthritis now for Gurley, and it's keeping him from playing like 50% of the snaps for Atlanta. When I look at Todd Gurley and his future, he doesn't have a future in the NFL. He should never ever get another get another running back job in this league again, because he is not productive at all. The only times you were getting production from him in fantasy was when he was scoring twice in fantasy games. He's got no involvement in the passing game whatsoever. He sucks. Good riddance, Todd Gurley. Thank you for your production. You had a nice career for like 2 or 3 years while it lasted. Get out.
Yeah, going back to what TJ said, he asked what happened to Todd Gurley? Well, this is what happened. The Atlanta Falcons, it took them 9 weeks to figure out that Todd Gurley was not a good running back. They kept feeding him the ball. He got over 20 touches a game. And that's the only reason why he was decent in fantasy, because of the volume he was getting. But he was averaging like under 3 yards a carry in literally all of his games. And now they realize, oh, this guy is not really good at football. Let's stop giving him the ball. And that's exactly what they did. And that has caused him to fall right off of the cliff. And if you have him on a dynasty team, I am so sorry for your loss, because you either paid a high price for him or you have to deal with him this year if it was your first year. But he's toast. He's done.
All right. I'll save mine for last. Sperator, you give us your most aged player.
All right. This guy isn't really that big of a name. I'm sure neither of you really thought of him, but it's Robbie Anderson, wide receiver of the Carolina Panthers. From weeks 1 to 7, he was the wide receiver 7, averaging 16 points per game. Then we go to weeks 8 to 16. He is the wide receiver 31, averaging 12 points per game. Now, for weeks 1 to 7, they were really eye-opening to a lot of people. If he was on your team, he was probably in your lineup because of his production, and he probably remained in your lineup through a lot of the weeks after his hot start. And he really hurt you. He had a significant drop-off in production. I mean, from the first half of the year, he was averaging 91 receiving yards per game. And in the second half, he's averaging just 52 receiving yards per game. He's getting a lot of targets. He's just not doing anything after the catch. And most aged. Started well and ended poorly.
Yep, I think Robbie Anderson now, if the season were to continue on, I think Robbie Anderson is the third option in that Carolina passing attack behind DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel. That's how far Robbie Anderson has fallen. Most aged, for me, it was between two guys, and I immediately went. They're on the same team. It went to one team, and it's the Seattle Seahawks combination of Tyler Lockett and Russell Wilson. Those guys are just both, have fallen from grace. But I ultimately decided to go with Russell Wilson, who has 0 MVP votes in the National Football League, and he will continue to receive 0 MVP votes, as I think he's going to go into his age 32 season in the NFL next year. And it's really simple. Wilson was the MVP, no doubt about it. Favorite for the MVP, QB1, star in fantasy, the first half of the season. In the first 8 weeks, he averaged 25.5 points per game. QB1, MVP, as I just said. And in his last 7 weeks, he's averaged about 19 points per game. And that's including a really, really disappointing performance, in the playoffs, nonetheless, against Washington, where he scored 12 points. Wilson I don't even know Wilson seems to be like this all the time. He always, he lights up the world in the first half of the season, but then he kind of fades in the second half. And maybe it's got something to do with the fact that Chris Carson was hurt in the first half of the year, and now he's back, so they're gonna run the ball now. But the whole mantra, the whole saying of the first half was let Russ cook. Well, they're not doing that anymore, and while they have Carson, and Carson's a free agent after this year, so who knows what'll happen with their running back situation. But Wilson is, if Wilson is just so bad to the point now where I don't even know. You'd start. He's a matchup dependent quarterback. If the season were to continue right now, and you were playing your championship or something in week 17, he's a matchup dependent quarterback now. And the honorable mention, as I said before, I'm giving it to Tyler Lockett because really, it's only been 2 games for him all year long that are boosting his numbers and boosting his averages. And that was week 3 against Dallas when he had 9 for 100 and 3 touchdowns. And then I forget what week it is, but against Arizona on Sunday night, he had 15 for 203. That's really been it for Tyler Lockett, who is really, he's simply not usable in fantasy anymore. He's not usable. I don't even know where he goes next year in drafts. But, I mean, when you really talk about Tyler Lockett's stretch now, it's been the better part of, like 6 weeks or 7 weeks where it's been really, really underwhelming fantasy production. So I ultimately chose Wilson, but I'm going to, say the combination of those Seattle Seahawks as the most aged this year.
I think you could give this award to the entire Seattle Seahawks team as a whole. I mean, you only mentioned Lockett and Wilson, but I think DK Metcalf can certainly be thrown around in this conversation. I mean, from the weeks 1 to 9, he was the wide receiver 3. Since then, he's been the wide receiver 17 on the year. So I don't know exactly what happened, if they just stopped trusting Russell Wilson so much, if it was Carson getting injured. But this entire Seahawks offense as a whole is definitely taking a step back.
I think what happened is Seattle's defense surprisingly got a lot better, because we just saw them last week against the Rams. They shut down the Rams, but they've been doing this for a couple of weeks now. I don't think Seattle really needs the pass as much as they did when they were giving up, say, 34 points to the Cowboys back in like week 3 when it was 37-34. That's when they were all having their amazing games.
Yep,
That's
definitely.
A explanation.
All right, moving on to our last award, which is going to be the biggest sleeper, and this award is going. It's going to go to the player that we think was really everyone just like didn't pay any attention to this guy, or didn't consider this guy as a big time name. We didn't really get any recognition before the season started, and really slipped in drafts and was kind of overlooked. And as the award says, the player everyone slept on, sort of, that was drafted in the late rounds, that really rose to the occasion and produced for your fantasy team. So biggest sleeper, let's go Andrew Sparator. Give us the biggest sleeper according to you.
All right, this might be a little controversial because he was getting talked about a little in the preseason, But my biggest sleeper is Antonio Gibson, running back of the Washington football team. This is a guy, if you drafted before the news of Adrian Peterson being cut, then you drafted him in the double-digit rounds, so round 10 and beyond. And all you have gotten from Antonio Gibson has been greatness. He's the running back 12 in total points. He's averaging 16 points per game, excluding week 13, which obviously he got injured with turf toe after in the first quarter. And from his real stretch came from week 2 to week 12, where he was the running back 5. Obviously, he had that big Thanksgiving Day game where he had 3 touchdowns. That was that was really exciting, but I don't think that was really his first breakout game. His first breakout game came weeks before against the Cowboys, where he had over 100 rushing yards. Antonio Gibson has been a running back 1, and you got him in double-digit rounds, so biggest sleeper.
Absolutely. Gibson has been, he's one of those late round rookies that hit this year. Definitely worthy, and somebody I thought about but ultimately didn't choose as the biggest sleeper. All right, TJ, give us your biggest sleeper of the year.
My biggest sleeper, not to the extreme that Sperator did it, but I went with Keenan Allen. And I think it was a lot of people were sleeping on him in the draft because Tyrod Taylor was obviously going to be the starter. And we know Tyrod is a mobile quarterback. All right, he's not, and he doesn't really work with his arm more. He works with his legs. And so Keenan Allen was falling to 4th, 5th round. And obviously that has to do with Phillip Rivers leaving for Indianapolis. But once Justin Herbert came in, this guy was putting up solid numbers. Right? And he was obviously his favorite target. He's putting up games of 20, 25, 30. And you were very lucky if you got him while he was falling to get Keenan Allen in those drafts.
Absolutely. Nope. Nobody really expected, Herbert to come in and, really provide, Keenan Allen with a really competent quarterback that could just get him the ball. But definitely great sleepers. And my sleeper that I ultimately decided to go with is Aaron Rodgers. And everyone really slept on Aaron Rodgers in fantasy this year. He was drafted, definitely, I think, for the most part, outside of everyone's top 12 quarterbacks. And he slipped into the double-digit rounds of most fantasy drafts, I think. And he was definitely not drafted in most cases to be your starting quarterback for your fantasy squad. And he ended up being the QB4 on the year, 23.8 points per game. Everyone, including myself, really thought that Green Bay was going to be more of a run-heavy team, and that Rodgers, coming off a bad year last year, he was washed sort of, and they're just going to lean on their trio of running backs that they have. And Rodgers simply proved all of us wrong. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that his supposed heir apparent in Jordan Love was drafted, but it really seems like this is a different Aaron Rodgers from what we saw a year ago. And he's going to be the MVP of this year. I think he's got 44 touchdown passes to 5 interceptions, which is incredible. So Aaron Rodgers has, really put up big time numbers. And he's done it as, as I said, a double-digit round quarterback in drafts. So I thought Aaron Rodgers was slept on quite a bit this year.
Yeah, and he definitely proved everyone wrong. And he was getting so much slack because there were multiple factors going against him. Obviously, they drafted Jordan Love in the first round. That came out of nowhere as well. He's up there in age. He's 37 years old. He's had some regression over the past couple of years, so there was definitely justification in taking him in the double-digit rounds. And even then, I along with other people have thought that he was being overdrafted, but clearly he's turned into one of the best value picks of the entire year.
And it's just so awesome to see how he's doing it. I mean, his wide receiver 2 for most of the year has been Marquise Valdes-Scantling. He turned Robert Tonyan into a tight end that people can actually use. We didn't think there was any tight end in that offense. So, I mean, we only thought it was Devontae, Aaron Jones on a check down. But, I mean, this guy, 44 touchdowns, that's just insane.
And I think, Sperator, we know he wants to make love with Josh Allen, but I think for the most part we can agree that Aaron Rodgers is going to be the MVP this year.
Yes, I will concede to
All right, good. Good. All right. This has been a very enjoyable experience and award ceremony. We thank our champion, TJ Rogers, for joining the show very much. In the coming weeks, we definitely expect to be releasing an episode based on our 2021 early rankings. So we're going to give our top 12 quarterbacks, top 24 receivers and running backs, and then our top 12 tight ends. And we're going to do it right after week 17. So this is really early. A lot is going to change, but we're going to give our initial thoughts on how just the draft is fantasy drafts could shape out next year. Any last words from Andrew and TJ?
I just want to thank TJ Rogers for coming on the show and doing a nice job. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was very fun.
All right. We'll see you next time in the fish tank.